I now come to the next part, and that is, what do we need to bring peace? Many committees and many experts have recommended many ideas and actions to be undertaken by the government. Let me add my own. I call it a new covenant for J&K. A new covenant is not something which is out of the hat, but it is something built on experience and built on the realities on the ground, rather than in theory what needs to be done in a disturbed area, so to say. Having established that there is probably a need for a new covenant. Covenant, as you know, is a compact, almost like an agreement. But the idea of covenant is that it is holistic. It is supported by people at large. That's why a covenant, and not something which is like a pact between two nations. So the idea is that here's something that brings the people and the administration and the powers that be on the same platform. And that chasm which is between the two is closed. In fact, nullified if possible. The idea is that all the factors that we saw that affect bringing back of peace are the ones on which we should act. So I would suggest that it should be based on 3 principles. And the first principle being that let us take a look holistically at the entire state of being and not get so focused on what is going on in the valley that we lose sight of the rest of the people. After all, the majority of people are not part of this agitation. When you consider the other 2 regions, namely Jammu, Ladakh, and the fringes of the Kashmir Valley. So obviously they constitute the much, much larger section of the population. So the first principle is the internal integration within the state, where there should be no feeling amongst the people that they continue to be neglected or treated as a lower priority simply because there is no agitation there. In other words, it shouldn't convey a wrong message where, well, unless you start stone throwing, nobody is going to listen to you. That wouldn't be nice. That would be incorrect. So therefore the internal integration is the first part. The second part is, like I mentioned in the first part also, that is an even-handed approach. Even-handed approach across the board, across the 3 regions. Of course, appropriate to the requirements of that region, requirements of people of that region, and not as a blanket which is common to all. For instance, later on when I talk about compensation, in Ladakh, you will never have a problem of compensation payment. Whereas, and nor will you have that problem of compensation in the valley. But there is a big problem of compensation for those who have suffered by cross-border firing from Pakistan, for instance. Now, can you lose sight of that in favor of just looking after the agitation? That's why the even-handed approach is essential. The third thing is to take away a feeling that the government of the day, I'm referring now to the state government, is only a mouthpiece of the union government. That feeling must be taken away, and for which, as they talk about justice, it must not only be done but must appear to be done. Similarly, when you're trying to project a difference in the method of governance, it must also appear to the common man. So the central government, the union government, must be seen as a facilitator and not dictating terms. Although that there may be no truth in the latter part, but the people may have that impression in their mind, and often do, because when you talk to people who are part of this agitation, number of times they tell you that, oh, this government only takes orders from Delhi, which is not quite the case. But if that is the impression, we need to do something. So the three principles, as I mentioned, are these three. Firstly, an internal integration, an even-handed approach, and the union government being seen as a facilitator and a do-gooder rather than anything else that may be perceived. Okay. Having seen that, okay, these are the three principles on which I recommend that we should develop a new covenant. What is the change of focus? I mean, what is so new about this governance? The focus is, quite every now and then, you need to change the focus depending upon the local situation. And in this case, since there is that gulf between the government and the people, the first thing should be the government should be seen as focusing on concern for people. Concern for people and an attitude where they are reaching out to help rather than waiting for people to come to them for help. That is something that is well known. I mean, this is good governance anywhere. But the fact is, if it is not being perceived as such, then they need to do that. So the first focus, as I see, is this business of special care and so on. Second thing that people must see, and as I said, that facilitator should be the union government must be the facilitator. Similarly, the state government must also be seen as an enabler. Something which is doing something so that the people get enabled in many ways. Not only just for employment or for making sure that the education system runs smoothly or whatever, but as enabler. The governance the accent should be on enabling people rather than governing them. In fact, let me use a little semantics here. Let's not rule people, let's govern people. You know, if you take this word out of our lexicon, that the present rulers, they are not the present rulers, they are the present government, which in any democratic setup has a tenure. So let's not call them rulers as if it's a hereditary kind of a thing which is coming down the ages. So once that attitude changes from being rulers to being good government or good leaders, then all these things will fit into that new focus that I was talking about. Third thing, when there is lack of communication, and that is what is called by this gulf, what is the first thing that comes to mind and what needs to be done? Obviously, you need to engage with people, reach out. You have to generate confidence in the people, in the government. Today what has happened is nobody seems to take government seriously. In fact, the common refrain one hears at the street level is, this government will do nothing, or what's the use? This is how it has been for the last so many years. You know, a feeling of dejection, a feeling of rejection, now that's not a good thing. You need to build confidence amongst people that yes, this is a government which we have elected, and therefore it will respond to our requirements. So the second thing is this. And finally, and probably most importantly, something that bothers even those who don't indulge in stone pelting or agitation is a sense of dignity. Doesn't matter what your social status is, each individual, each person in a given state respects his own dignity and wants others to respect that dignity. And therefore restoring dignity should be the other part of the focus. Whatever the government does, it doesn't have to move mountains. But if you can simply restore that dignity, the man will automatically start having greater confidence in the government. And then that would lead to the next step, and that is the engagement and so on and so forth. People will say, yes, now somebody is in charge. Now this government cares. Now this government is doing what we want it to do.